All right, we're back on Top 25 Voter Pod with John Warner and Chad Conine. Gentlemen, good to see y'all.
Good to see
Absolutely.
you guys. Anytime.
I just got back from the driving range on this sunny 70 afternoon.
Oh, must be tough. John and I are in the office.
Whew. Oh, y'all are both in the office.
Indeed.
Just have a big party without me.
Let's jump in. So Baylor, the men would have probably liked to have clinched their first Big 12 championship at the Farrell Center, but they really could not have put on a much more impressive performance against West Virginia on Tuesday night. Bears win 94-89 in overtime on the road. Really tough place to play. That came just 9 days after COVID protocol, after the Bears came back from that. So just, Johnny, just how impressive of a game was this for Baylor?
I got to say, I wasn't expecting it at all. Like you said, it's a tough place to play. West Virginia had won 6 of 7 games, playing great. And the way Baylor looked against Kansas, they just looked COVID stricken to me. They didn't have a whole lot of energy. They shot terribly. They defended terribly. They rebounded terribly. And they fixed a lot of those things, in about as key a game as you could have. And, they shot over 50% against West Virginia, over 40% from the three, and just made some great plays at the end of regulation. Matthew Meyer really gave him a huge spark off the bench, 18 points. Jared Butler made a tremendous drive with 2 seconds left against Derek Culver, just went really strong to the basket to tie it up. And then Davion Mitchell just took over in overtime and, made a bunch of big shots. And it was highly impressive.
Yeah. So with that in mind, let me pose this one to Chad. Baylor wins the Big 12, pretty tough basketball conference. We've addressed that all year, with Michigan losing, last night as well. That was kind of a shocking score, 76-53 to Illinois. Anyway, Baylor doesn't get a number 1 seed. Chad?
Yeah, I don't know if they would have lost last night. I mean, I if they'd have gone on a losing streak and dropped 2 or 3 in a row, they might have slipped from a number 1 seed. But their status, from what they did through the first 17 games of their season or 18 games of their season, whatever it was, kind of cemented them in that spot. They were going to have to do a lot to lose it. Now I don't think they possibly can.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
go ahead, John.
I agree with Chad. Even if they lost their last 2 games at home against Oklahoma State and Tech, which I don't think they'll lose both. And I think they've got it. And I think that Michigan loss probably kind of sealed it too, because Michigan was the hot team and they just got stomped at home. I mean, just obliterated really. And I think they've got it regardless of what they do the rest of the regular season and the Big 12 tournament.
Meanwhile, here in the college basketball capital of the universe, the beat goes on for the Lady Bears. 11, they cranked it up to 11. That's the headline I wanted to use, Chad, but I stuck with your
Lady Bears go to 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been good. Yeah. Of course, a reference to the greatness that is Spinal Tap.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, if the Lady Bears go on and add a tournament title as they are prone to do, meaning the Big 12 tournament, do you feel like they're a lock for a 2 seed or could they still slip in that 3 line?
Well, I don't know. I've wondered for a long time if they could work their way even into a 1 seed because of the volatility of the women's game right now this year. There's Kim Mulkey has said many times there's no dominant team, and it's hard to argue with her. Now UConn is coming on strong as Paige Beckers kind of settles into her freshman season, and she started to do some pretty spectacular things. But I think they're probably in that 2, pretty solid. There's some teams ahead of them that they're not going to pass more than likely, just because of strength of schedule issues. We've talked about it on this podcast before, but Baylor has taken over and just put a stranglehold on the Big 12 to the extent that once strong programs are just not even competitive with Baylor very often. I mean, Oklahoma, Texas Tech, Texas, they don't put up much of a fight very often against Baylor these days. They certainly haven't this year. I guess the Texas game the other night was a 7-point game by the end, but that was because I think of a 9-0 run at the end of regulation by the Longhorns. So yeah, and you know what? I've got a question for you, maybe later in the podcast, or maybe right now. I'm not sure which, but they're doing some things that make me think they might go to another level here.
So the question is,
right what's that?
Yeah. So the question is, can they win another?
So from an NBA fan perspective, you see a lot, and I think James Harden could do this. There's certain guys in the NBA that do this. When the team needs a bucket, or just as a part of their offense, they get the guy the ball at the top of the key, and they dare somebody to stop him. And if they bring more than one person over to stop him, he gets rid of the ball, and they get a bucket that way. That's kind of more of an NBA offense than what you see in college. But the other night when Nalyssa Smith takes the ball at the top of the key, and I don't know if you've seen this play or not, and crosses over Charlie Collier and goes to the basket and gets a layup and an and one and completes the 3-point play. That's that kind of a play, and I wonder if that might become part of the Lady Bears, deal.
Well, so it's a very interesting question. When the Rockets were doing a lot of that with Harden, the critics would just decry, that as ISO ball. It's just ISO ball. And you think back to like the 90s when Doug Collins was coaching the Bulls before Phil Jackson got there. There was a press conference where Jordan won the game after, and they asked Collins what play he ran, and he said, "I ran get the ball to Michael and get the bleep out of the way." But the thing about that is, in the modern game, and certainly in the NBA, it is more, there's more strategy there than you might just realize off the surface. Like when the Rockets were doing it, they would, they'd set a lot of picks, and they would try to free up mismatches. And when they had the mismatch that they wanted, then they would attack that and try to expose it. And so, yeah, I think that there is room for that in the Lady Bears repertoire. If Nalyssa has those kind of skills, and I think, we say she does, why not, get her the ball in one-on-one situations where, she can take somebody off the dribble and go score.
Yeah, that's kind of how I see it now. Whether or not the Lady Bears are willing to throw another wrinkle into what they do here late in the season. But I mean, why not when she can make plays like that against, the supposed number 1 draft pick?
Well, why don't you send this podcast to Kim and just link this part of it and say, "Hey, we got a little suggestion for you, Kim."
That's bcherry at wacotrib.com.
So Chad mentioned, former schools that used to be good when he was talking about the Lady Bears dominance. One of those schools that used to be good kind of on the men's side is Kansas. We've talked a lot about the Jayhawks this year. How about that for a segue? But Kansas did pick up a pretty big win over Baylor last weekend there at Allen Fieldhouse. In doing so, did they draw up the blueprint for how to beat the Bears, as we go on further in March?
Yeah, I would maybe say it's a blueprint. They went inside to their big guy, David McCormick. He scored 20 points. He had 14 in the first half. And they kind of slowed it down, made it more of a half-court game. But I think even bigger than that was they didn't allow Baylor to get into transition very much. Baylor didn't hardly get any steals. They hardly got any fast breaks going. And I think that might have hurt them even more, than the big man inside. But yeah, Baylor's, probably their weakness would probably be, having a big guy inside who can score. I think Flo Thamba and Jonathan Chama Chachua can both defend well. But yeah, I mean, that's probably a way you have a chance to beat Baylor.
They're more of rim runners on offense. They don't have a lot of, offensive moves, I guess I would say. God, I had one more question I was going to ask, and it's sort of.
Well, let me chime in on that one.
Okay.
On that last question for a second. Baylor got back into its groove by hitting 13 3-pointers against West Virginia. And the difference between 6 3-pointers and 13 3-pointers, that's, I'm not
a win and a loss.
That's 7 points right there. And even going a little bit deeper, if Baylor shoots 25% from 3-point range, there's a lot of teams that can beat them. But when they shoot 42% from 3-point range, there aren't many that can beat them.
Yeah, brilliant analysis there. When you make baskets, you're hard to beat. Come back next week for more coaching tips.
Well, then here we are trying to give Kim some coaching tips.
I know. Well,
all over the place.
It's like when you're watching a baseball game and you're like, why didn't the pitcher throw that double play ball right now? That pitch, that's the one we need. Forget the curveball, forget the fastball. Let's throw that 6-4-3 pitch.
One of my sisters, one of my nieces and nephews, my niece was playing in her junior high basketball game, and my nephew, who's a few years older, was just sitting there watching. And he's a big basketball fan, likes to play basketball, and he leans over his dad and he said, the thing about girls basketball is they just don't make many of their shots. So that was that kind of analysis, I think.
Yeah.
Before we get any emails on that one, that's just an 11-year-old watching the game and being frank about it without a whole lot of, in-depth understanding of, okay, this is 8th grade girls basketball. So
right.
So you're saying that's pretty much our level of expertise?
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
I think we've had a few missed layups in this podcast. And with that, I can't remember the other question I was going to ask, but I think that seems like a pretty good place to. We'll save some ammo for our postseason podcast.
I don't know that that's a real good place to stop, but just put it at the bank as one of our 60 that we have to do this month.
Good call. All right, we'll see y'all next week.